Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. More bad news for the Trudeau government's embattled Métis self-government recognition legislation. The Métis Nation-Saskatchewan has decided to withdraw its support for Bill C-53. This leaves only the Métis Nation of Ontario and Métis Nation Alberta still supporting the proposed legislation. APTN's Fraser Needham has the story.
Métis Nation-Saskatchewan President Glenn McCallum says after extensive meetings earlier this week, the organization has decided to head in a different direction and negotiate directly with the federal government.
After assessing, evaluating the situation that we're in, we decided, our council decided, our government decided, no, we're going to do it alone.
Bill C-53 has been mired in controversy ever since it was introduced by the federal government last year. The legislation formally recognizes Métis governments in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. But First Nations in Ontario and the Manitoba Métis Federation have rallied hard against the bill because they don't see the Métis Nation of Ontario as a legitimate Métis organization. MMF representative for the Southwest region, Will Gooden, says the MNS made the right move.
Better late than never. So I'm pretty happy that there was some cooler heads in the room with Métis Nation Saskatchewan, obviously in the last few days, and that there was they saw the writing on the wall that this bill is just seeing so much opposition from across the country.
McCallum says the MNS is now confident the organization will be able to get its own self-government agreement with Ottawa.
I believe the federal government will be very supportive in regards to where we're going, and hopefully in the near future that we are going to sign our own treaty.
As for the future of Bill C-53, which now sits in a House of Commons committee after passing 2 readings, Gooden had some choice words.
Bill C-53 is in the coffin. It's nailed shut. It's likely got a stake through its heart and a silver bullet, and it's lowered into the ground, and the dirt is being poured on it now.
APTN News reached out to the Métis Nations of Alberta and Ontario for comment and was directed to a joint online statement which says, "Our governments wish the Métis Nation-Saskatchewan well as it embarks on its continuing journey to have its self-government fully recognized." In an emailed statement, Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations Gary Anasandagri's office says, "We will continue to work with the Métis governments in Alberta, Ontario, and Saskatchewan to recognize their rights in ways that work for them and in the spirit of reconciliation." Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Today at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, delegates declared the opioid crisis in British Columbia as a state of emergency. And a hereditary chief from Nicaragua says Indigenous leaders' lives are at risk there. Angel Moore reports.
Here at the United Nations headquarters in New York City, the Siltotine Nation in British Columbia is celebrating an anniversary. It's been 10 years since the Supreme Court of Canada agreed the nation holds Aboriginal title to part of its traditional territory. While that's cause for celebration, what's not is the state of emergency there caused by the abuse of opioids. Zina Lula is a youth ambassador.
Our youth are taking drugs to try and stop the pain, the trauma they have experienced. Our people are being poisoned, just like our waters and our lands. We come here with heavy hearts, but also with the message for Canada and the world. We know the path to healing, it is decolonization.
Chief Joe Alfonse says the youth will change the future.
Our youth today, they're educated, they're rich in their culture, they're proud, and they seek the spotlight. So deal with us. You think we're tough, you wait till they come of age.
Meanwhile, in South America, Indigenous peoples' rights are criminalized. Carlos Hendy is the hereditary chief of the Mixcoto people in Nicaragua. He says he cannot return home after he spoke at the forum last year, alleging his son was murdered.
Even though that, our voice is not against the Nicaraguan government, our voice is just to ask for the indigenous people's right. But even so, they see us as a legitimate opposition to them. That's what they see us. And we are no opposition to no government. We are just Indigenous people asking for Indigenous people's rights.
Now Hendy is living in the United States, fearing for his life.
Yes, I'm afraid of myself. Even in the United States, I'm afraid of myself. I'm exiled in the United States.
Clem Chartier is the international ambassador for the Manitoba Métis Federation. He says Hendy's fears are justified. Chartier is at the forum on behalf of Indigenous leader Brooklyn Rivera, who was arrested in Nicaragua after criticizing the Nicaragua government.
And we have not to this day heard a thing about where he is, what his situation is like. And I'm here, and I did make an intervention to ask the UN to continue its efforts to have him produced, to have proof of life, and also to work towards his release.
The forum continues on Friday with discussions to improve Indigenous health and wellness and empower youth voices. Angel Moore, APTN National News, New York City.
Thanks, Angel. Single occupancy hotels across the country are often used to house those who might not be counted as homeless or living on the streets. In Winnipeg, many of those dwellings are along the iconic Main Street, including the McLaren Hotel. Built over a century ago, it is now getting a facelift to better serve its 150 residents. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley.
Geraldine Halcrow has called the McLaren home on and off for years.
My door is broken in maybe once or twice a week. I'm a woman. I'm scared.
Despite that, Geraldine calls those that live here family. She's one of 150 residents living in this old hotel turned into single-dwelling homes. Now, thanks to the Equal Housing Initiative, this place will undergo renovations for the next 2 years, costing about $37.5 million. No one will get evicted. The renovations will happen one floor at a time. The executive director says this approach allows for some stability in the tenants' lives.
People that are dealing with mental health, with addiction, with poverty, it's a journey, right? And it's not a continue in one direction. It's a zigzaggy line.
James Tower has lived here since 2011. The best part of the renovation for him?
They closed down the BLT lounge downstairs and the vendor too,
At least half of the tenants are Indigenous. That's why a common area was vital.
To do traditional medicines if they want, to smudge.
In the meantime, other programs have started here. Every Thursday, tenants and volunteers alike prepare a hot meal and package food hampers that get delivered to every resident in the building. Michael Miner is a master's in social work student who did his placement here last summer. He still comes to cook on his own time because he believes in the holistic approach used here.
I think that the most important thing working with people who are housing insecure or don't have dependable food sources is finding ways to meet all of their needs at once. And it's programs like at the McLaren where they're making sure all of those pieces can come together.
While the inside will change a lot, the outside not so much.
The McLaren Hotel is a heritage building, so basically what you see now is what it'll still look like when renovations are done. But just a few steps over here, these buildings will be torn down to build the transition housing that will be called Recover Bridge.
They would have an option right next door. Because what we also learned from many people that live here is this is their home.
The dwellings will be more typical housing units ranging from bachelor to 1 and 2 bedrooms. Both the McLaren and Recover Bridge should be completed by summer 2026 and will be staffed 24/7. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Nice changes there. This week's federal budget has been widely panned by many Indigenous leaders. After the break, our Truth in Politics panel will be here to provide their 2 cents. Stick around. Welcome back. The Liberals dropped their budget for the next year on Tuesday. A $50 billion orgy of spending, according to opposition leader Pierre Poilievre. But many Indigenous leaders are saying the budget doesn't address long-standing concerns. So what does Budget 2024 mean for First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples? That's the topic this week for our Truth and Politics panel. Nigan Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press, and Jennifer Lewitz is a policy analyst for Warshield Consulting. Jennifer and Nigan, thanks for being with us this week to talk about the budget. Jennifer, in recent weeks we've talked a lot about safety and policing in our communities. Was there any specifics in the budget about this?
Yeah, I saw that there was some budget items from last year just re-announced, which seems to be an occurrence with this government. But I did see AFN National Chief Cindy Woodhouse did come out and say that, you know, regardless of these announcements that are made year after year in the federal budget, without the introduction of that legislation, First Nations and Inuit policing program, communities are going to continue facing barriers and at risk of security issues as well. So although I'm sure communities do welcome those budget announcements, when you don't see concrete action in terms of getting that legislation on the order paper and then passed, there's really not much left to say about it.
Nigan, another big thing, of course, was housing. The Liberals have earmarked less than $1 billion for Indigenous housing and infrastructure. That comes just days after the AFN was saying the gap is $350 billion for First Nations alone. Thoughts on the funding there for housing?
In 2016, just after Justin Trudeau was elected for the very first time with the majority mandate, unlike now with the minority mandate, there was the large-scale announcements of commitments to housing, a bunch of other things as well, but particularly to housing. And unfortunately, that money has been caught up in red tape. The Auditor General came out back in March saying that the money is inefficiently been used and has been sort of salted away with the different inefficiencies in government. And one of the main problems is that this tremendous infrastructure gap, as the AFN has pointed out, involving hundreds of billions of dollars, has now grown, even though these federal liberals have removed the 2% cap, which was problematic for years, creating situations of emergent housing. They've now increased the funding, but yet, oddly enough, the money isn't leaving the government, isn't getting to communities. And so the announcement of more money for housing in this budget is in many ways addressing some of the infrastructure gaps that AFN is talking about. But the question is will the money make it? It certainly suggests that in the past, this government has really had some trouble getting money out the door, and it seems to be just spinning its wheels and money used in administration, other governmental, ministerial work, and so on.
Jennifer, much has been made about the Deputy Premier and Prime Minister and Finance Minister making no mention of reconciliation or Indigenous peoples in Tuesday's budget. What does that say to you?
Perhaps they're starting to learn that reconciliation isn't talking, reconciliation is action. And when we continue to hear year after year, number one, that the budget announcements aren't where they should be. And not only that, we're also hearing about how many First Nations and different First Nations organizations like the Chiefs in Ontario need to take this government to court over funding that is owed to them for things like First Nations policing, amongst other things. That's an issue. And it just seems like no matter where we go, this government is having a really hard time working with the nations. And, you know, even like the carbon tax is one of the biggest conversations right now. And I heard it mentioned yesterday, somebody had said, why didn't they consult with the nations on this so that they could have alleviated some of the problems we're now hearing where, you know, there's a mix of wanting to advance environmental policies, which we should be doing, but also just the way that they're delivering it is not resonating with First Nations across the country. Consult. And that was one of the things that the Harper government did not do. And now that seems like the Liberal government is now headed down the same path of just no consultation and ending themselves up in trouble with nations and First Nations people across the country. And that's not reconciliation. So talking is not reconciliation, action is.
Nigan, anything else in the budget or not in the budget that sticks out for you?
No, I think that this budget is the kind of budget that looks like a pre-election budget, but is certainly not going to meet anyone's kind of expectations. And I think particularly because of the long time kind of political capital that the federal Liberals have but on issues impacting Indigenous communities, to really see this budget as not committing further or perhaps backpedaling, so tells you a couple things. First is there's a lack of political will developing amongst the Liberals to engage this issue and to see this as an election issue. And I think they're moving more towards affordability, and particularly, I think that's in direct relation to what the Conservatives are driving the agenda. The second is there is a real failure amongst Minister Gangry. The Mark Miller would not have let this happen. Mark Miller was at least in the process of engaging with First Nations much more regularly than what has been a real absence in the ministerial leadership within the Liberals at the moment. And then thirdly, I think that when we are in a position in which the government overall has lost faith, I think, in itself. And this budget has really indicated that there is a real fracturing within the Liberal Party of really where to go on this issue. I think Jennifer pointed out climate change is something that's been real fractured. I also think that Israel and the ways in which Jewish Canadians are being engaged or not engaged within this Liberal Party, there's real schisms that are developing within the Liberals, and we're seeing it played out on the impacts of the lack of attention to Indigenous issues.
Jennifer and Egon, we'll have to leave it there. Appreciate you both being here with us this week.
Yeah, Miigwech, thanks.
After seeing a gap in alternative healthcare offered on First Nations, 3 Indigenous women have come together to bring the services where they're needed. Registered massage therapists Roberta Beattie, Jordan Ledoux, and Marilyn Beattie Martin saw that their services were hard for Indigenous peoples to access. All 3 women said they have heard people express their wishes for massage services, but have never had access to a therapist close enough to them. The group created Ta-Ka-Ke therapy as a way to bring their services to First Nations who would otherwise not have access, as many people may be experiencing their first massage. Co-owner Roberta Beattie says it's all about making sure everyone is comfortable during their appointments.
People do have traumas as well, so if something happens, then they have that safe space to back off if they need to.
And after starting their services last month, First Nations can request Ta-Ka-Ke therapy to come to their communities. APTN Investigates continues its look inside the band office this week. We've got a preview for you after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Regular contributor Greg Scriver submitted this mirror-reflected sunset on waters near Petrie Island, near Ottawa, Ontario. Stunning as always, Greg. Thanks for sharing. For the chance to be our next photo of the day, you can send your photos to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, cloudy and 9 in Halifax, 15 in Fredericton. Cloudy and 2 for Kuujjuaq and Nain. 13 with showers in Montreal, rain and 8 for Val-d'Or. 3 with snow in Sault Ste. Marie, 8 with showers in North Bay. 5 with snow in Thunder Bay, flurries and 2 for Sioux Lookout. 2 with snow in God's Lake, Norway House and Thompson. 0 with snow for Winnipeg, +2 and flurries in Dauphin. -1 with snow in Regina, 1 above in Saskatoon. Sun's out and 6 for Meadow Lake, 5 and sunny in Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, sunny and 9 for Fort Chip, Fort Mac and Grand Prairie. Sun's out and 3 for Edmonton, cloudy and 3 for Lethbridge. 16 and sunny in Vancouver and Victoria. 10 in Prince George, sun's out and 9 for Smithers. 5 in Old Crow, 13 in Whitehorse. 9 for Yellowknife, 6 in Norman Wells. -9 in Sax Harbor, snow and 0 for Paulituck. -6 for Chesterfield, 8 below with snow in Baker Lake. -20 in Resolute and Joe Haven. Time to head over to our Ottawa studio now, where Annette Francis is standing by with a look at what's coming up tonight on our weekly political show.
Tonight on Nation to Nation, the 2024 federal budget tabled on Tuesday left Indigenous leaders dissatisfied. Many say it doesn't come close to meeting the needs and priorities of Indigenous communities. NDP MP Lori Idlow shares the same frustration.
Because we know that for too many decades there's been not enough investments to improve the lives of First Nations, Inuit and Métis, and this budget doesn't seem to indicate that there's going to be that much more investments to ensure that we're able to lift ourselves up so that we can help contribute to Canada's economy.
For years, members of Aamjiwnaang First Nation located near Sarnia, Ontario, have been living in the shadows of what is known as Chemical Valley. This week, high levels of pollution left Chief and Council to warn members to stay inside.
On the other side of the road in the Chemical Valley, all of their workers are trained. They're all protected from this particular chemical. But, and I'm closer to the refinery than the people in the same refinery on the other side of the refinery. That's how close we are here.
There's that and more later on Nation to Nation.
Looks good. Thanks, Annette. You can catch Nation to Nation in about 4 minutes from now. Meanwhile, members of a First Nation in Alberta say urgent action is needed to increase financial transparency in their communities. In tomorrow night's special look inside the band office, APTN Investigates reporters Brittany Gio and Tom Fenario examine housing concerns and accountability on the Stoney Nakoda Nation. Here's a preview.
Good Stoney is one of 3 bands that are a part of the Stoney Nakoda Nation. Over the years, and through different leadership administrations, the names of these nations have changed. But today, Good Stoney, Chiniki, and the Bears Paw bands all make up the Stoney Nakoda Nation.
Hey, are you
Hi.
Kenny?
Yes, I'm Kenny.
Hey, I'm Brittany.
Hi.
Nice to meet
Kenny Hunter is a member of the Good Stoney First Nation.
Back in the old days, I think there was less political opposition because it seemed like at that time people lived in harmony. But nowadays we don't even have band meetings anymore, regular band meetings. People don't know what's going on.
Let's just start from the beginning. How did this all come to be?
For years, Hunter has tried to get financial transparency for Good Stoney First Nation.
I think the government structure here within our own community is confusing because we don't know who's in charge of what.
In cities and towns, you can call 311, where you'll be directed to the specific department you need information about. But on the res, where can you go for financial transparency?
You can watch APTN Investigates inside the band office, stonewalled, tomorrow night, immediately following the APTN National News. And award-winning reporter Brittany Gio will be here to talk more about it as well. And you can catch up on the first part of Inside the Band Office or any past episodes of APTN Investigates over on our APTN News YouTube page. You can also find much more, over on our website, aptnnews.ca. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. I'm Dennis Ward, Marcy McGuitch. Thanks for being with us. Stick around. Nation to Nation is up next. We'll see you back here tomorrow.